Everybody, welcome. We're absolutely thrilled you can join us for this Friday lunch and learn with the learning table through the next group. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome Rebecca Christianson from the consulting practice Thriving People. Rebecca and I have known each other for a couple of years now, and so I can really speak to the level of passion and expertise that she brings to the work that she delivers. Today's topic, how to increase your influence with senior leaders, seems so incredibly relevant to where we're at now, and then obviously the additional complexity when we're trying to navigate how to do that in a more virtual world. As I mentioned, I've been really lucky to know Rebecca for a couple of years or now. She's worked in a number of internal head of people roles, both in Victoria, with example Metro Trains, where she was the head of talent, South Australia, where she was recently working with an organisation called Electronet as the head of people, but also you'll probably notice a little bit of a twang in the UK, where she was the head of talent for an organisation called Innocent Drinks. It was perhaps maybe that experience in the UK working for a really entrepreneurial business, perhaps a flatter management structure, which really started the piquing of the interest about the science of influencing, especially through others. Subsequent roles in large, complex, hierarchical matrix organisations, I guess, really demonstrated the need and the requirement to influence. And she really set about, I guess, developing her own team's influencing skills to really push that talent agenda. When then obviously starting life as an organisational psychologist, there's the neuroscience that's come into play, and I guess these days there's more and more information around the neuroscience of decision making and influencing, and how to really create those relationships. Now, I was going to say that kind of sounds like some dodgy kind of, medical piece around neuroscience. But again, we spoke about this. We can probably go into some deeper information about that in the future. As per usual, we're really trying to make this as interactive as possible. So have the fingers ready. We're going to be running some polls. We've got some examples. The chat box, will be utilising that for all of your questions and answers. But thank you once again, Rebecca, for joining us, and I'll hand over to you now.
Great. Thanks so much for the introduction, Jo, and I'm really happy to be here. It's a sunny day here in Adelaide, so the day's got off to a start, and I hope everyone's had a really good week so far. The weekend is very close. I've had a real big passion, as Jo was saying, around the ability to influence senior leaders. So I've been an executive in people and culture in government as well, and I've reset many people teams over the years to help them to be more commercial and also just to have that greater influence around senior leaders. A lot of the tips I'll be sharing today are quite practical, and they're very simple, but I find from my experience a lot of people, because of stress and frustration and the complexity of the world of work, can end up missing some of these basic practices. So they're all based on building good muscle memory in our brain. So that is being able to create some really strong neural pathways around our habits. I find a lot of people can just get into really unhelpful habits, like I said, based on stress and the pace of work, and they almost go into autopilot when they're interacting with other people. So hopefully today will just enable you to reflect on your own approach and just become a little bit more conscious around the way that you view and see other people. Jo gave a bit of a summary, so I won't share more about me, but I have a psychology background and an exec coach, and I'm always just really curious about people. And I think one of the things that's really important is around influencing people is to bring the right mindset, and that's a mindset of curiosity. So yes, I'm good at understanding people, partly because of my psych background, but also because I just find people really fascinating, and not in a psychoanalyst way at all, because I'm not a clinical psychologist, but in a way that it's really helpful to understand the complexity of people, and to, rather than trying to be frustrated at that, but to be curious, to be able to understand more. As far as the agenda for today, so I'll be sharing a little bit of context, Then also I'll be moving on to some intel around neuropsychology and how that links to the way we influence. I'll go through 5 practices to increase your impact, talk through the 3 biggest mistakes that I see a lot of, not just people in culture, but generally people, particularly in enabling functions in organisations, make when they're trying to increase their impact. And then I'll be challenging you to a 30-day influencing challenge for August. So I hope that you're interested in, I said, building your muscle memory, your influencing muscle memory. COVID's obviously been a really stressful time for everyone, and so it's really easy to become more task focused. And so I said, I hope today really helps you focus around your relationships and how you can, you're better able to enhance those. So we might start at the beginning and just say, you know, what is influencing? So to be able to influence is the capacity to have an impact on the character, development or behaviour of someone or something. I think that influencing is a superpower in the new world of work, given that everything is changing so quickly. So to be able to drive change at the right pace, you need to be able to take people on a journey. And regardless of your role, particularly, you know, in people and culture roles, we're always about trying to evolve culture, increase capability to influence and coach senior leaders. And so we're always taking people on a journey. And I think you need to be able to influence them to, you know, help them along the way. I'm going to start with an individual reflection. So hopefully you've all got a pen and paper nearby. But I want you just to take about 30 seconds to think about, within your current organisation, who is one of the biggest influencers? Someone that you think, wow, they're really good at influencing people, but they don't use their positional power. So what are some of the behaviours that they demonstrate, and what do they do? What do they do to be influential? So I'll just pause. So you can write down a few notes and have a think about it. And we'll come back to this at the end of the session. Okay. So hopefully you've got a few notes down there. So we'll come back to that. So when we're thinking about the world of influencing, there's lots of different angles that we can take. We can talk about influencing styles. So there are psychometrics that you can complete that can tell you your preferred influencing style. And this is usually the type of approach you take when you're trying to persuade someone. So it might be you have a very logical influencing style, or emotional, or coercive, not so great. But there are psychometrics you can take, and the purpose of them is to help you understand your preference and then to enable you to be more agile and to use different sorts of influencing styles. You can also talk about influencing from a personality perspective. So dependent on people's personality, there are patterns in how people take in information and how they make decisions. And so then you can adapt and tailor your strategy to influence them based on their difference. Now, both of these angles in influencing take a lot more than the time that we have today. And they're tailoring your approach. And I think often what gets missed when we're talking about influencing is around some basic practices. So these are simple habits that you can build over a period of time that you can use on anyone, regardless of their personality or regardless of your style. So these are consistent behaviours that can help you cultivate your influence. Because an individual, we don't just wake up one day influential all of a sudden. We put credits in the bank, or we sow seeds. We make gestures, we make efforts in particular ways, we invest in understanding people, and we hope that they'll grow in the future. But again, to continually maintain your influence, it's about being able to continually maintain some base level of habits in your everyday interactions with others. And these are not things that you can do extra. You don't have to create extra meetings to do these. These are practices that you can use in your current interactions that you have with senior leaders. I really like this quote around influencing. So there is no influence like the influence of habit. And I think for me, it has a double meaning. It talks about how habits influence us, but also for me, that influencing is a habit that we can build. And that's not something that we always think about when we're thinking about influencing, because we often think about it's in the moment. It's at a certain point in time. but there are habits that we can build, as I've said. Okay, so here's some fun stuff. I'm going to talk about around neuropsychology and influencing. So why I'm talking about this is I want to help you understand a bit more about some of our brain and some of our cognitive processes that take place naturally without us being aware. And yeah, so we'll go through, there's 3 of them that I want to be able to share. Most people work on autopilot, and that's just because the way the brain works is to try to help us to be more efficient, the most efficient as possible. It generalizes. It skips steps. We make assumptions, and we do that so we can move quickly through life, and particularly with the pace of life, I think that definitely influences the way our these brain processes or cognitive processes work as well. So let's look at the first one. So the first one is around selective attention. And in a nutshell, selective attention is saying that our brain can only take in a certain amount of information per second, and therefore it tunes out. We kind of ignore certain bits of information that we deem to be insignificant, and we don't make conscious decisions around this. Our brains, can go on autopilot until we become aware of that. We tend to focus on what's important. And that means that we miss things. And so, you know, we might be sitting in a meeting and someone's speaking and we're thinking about what we want to say in response to something they said a minute ago, but we miss part of what they said, and their follow-on from what they said may have been completely pertinent. And so, you know, we also, if we're taking notes, we might not be able to listen and take in. And so there are things that we miss. And so it means that we need to know that it's important to gather more information. We also have what we call confirmation bias, and this is the tendency to interpret new information that's based on our existing beliefs about a person. So let's take Darren. We've all known someone like Darren before. So Darren's a new leader in our organisation. We had our first meeting with Darren. Darren is very quick, you know, very enthusiastic and strong-willed and wants to impress. So he's quite open in his criticisms of the organisation. Some of the things that he thinks that they could do differently. He cuts people off a little bit. He shares his wisdom from other organisations quite readily. So I said, we all know someone like Darren. And if we think about confirmation bias, we may then have a catch-up one-to-one with Darren. So we've seen him in a meeting with a group of people and we've perhaps formed opinion of him. And maybe that he's acting a bit like a twat. He's cutting people off, he's not engaging people, and we're a little bit irritated by him. But when we go into a one-to-one meeting with him, he might be quite different. So he might listen more, ask more questions, you know, be a bit more humble and down to earth. But where confirmation bias kicks in is that if we have held a view from that meeting and we think, oh, Darren's a twat, we're kind of looking for twat-like behaviours when we end up having that one-to-one with him. We might not pay attention to the positive behaviours that he demonstrates. He might 5 times do some really great things like ask great questions. He might reflective listen back to what he heard, but we might skip that if we formed a view that he's a twat. We might think, we actually might only pay attention to the 2 things that he did, and that's when he did interrupt us, and that confirms our view. So we're ignoring certain information and we're focusing on what we already think of him. So this is interesting. So it can become a little bit of a risk for us, where we're not in information gathering mode still, because we've quickly moved to a decision. So the next part that then builds on this is what we call the fundamental attribution error, which is a bit of a mouthful. But essentially, it's the tendency for us to overemphasize personality explanations for annoying, interesting, different behaviour in others, and underestimating situational factors. So if I think about Darren in that meeting, I might attribute his behaviour to him, just saying, well, that's his style of leadership, that's his personality. And I'm less likely to think, maybe Darren's really tired. Maybe he was up half the night with his new baby and she couldn't sleep. Maybe the CE's given him an agenda to say, I want you to challenge people. And so he's going in challenging in every meeting. Maybe he's feeling the pressure of being a new person in a new role, and he's feeling, and he wants to be able to prove himself. They're all situational or environmental factors that can influence his behaviour. And as people, we're less likely to make excuses for someone else about situational or environmental impacts. We're more likely to blame it on the person and to think they're a bit more annoying or irritating, or not a very good leader, rather than make excuses. And we actually do the opposite with ourselves. So if I'm in a meeting and I interrupt people, I think, oh gosh, I shouldn't have done that, but I'm tired, so it's fine. We are more likely to make excuses about ourselves for our own behaviour, but not make excuses for other people, if that makes sense. So these are all, we could talk for hours about, some of the cognitive processes. But for me, I guess the takeaway from this is I want you to think about that our brain works on autopilot, and it's meant to support us, but sometimes it moves too quickly, and we generalize, we make judgments or assumptions about people, and that impacts our ability to then form relationships with them and then therefore influence them. So what I'm hoping you can take from this is that sometimes we just need to ask more information. We need to understand people a little bit better and be slightly less quick to judge other people. Okay, Joe, we're going to go to a poll question. So I thought I'd ask people, which process would you like to understand a little bit more as we go through the webinar? And I'll try to weave in an example just to bring them to life a little bit more.
Okay, I've just launched the polling now. So there's the question: which neuropsychology process would you like to understand more about as we go through the webinar? So I'll give ourselves about 25 seconds. Looks like we've got a bit of a strong lead already starting to appear with fundamental attribution error, as I get my tongue around that piece.
No, it's a mouthful, right?
All right. Okay, everybody, I'll end the polling now and share the results. Here we go.
Okay, so the fundamental attribution error, it is great. That's what a lot of people are interested in. Okay, so I'll try and weave that into some of the examples that I provide as we go through. Just to pause now, are there any other immediate questions that people wanted to ask?
To date, haven't got anything, but please remember, jump in the chat box just to add any questions, and we can ask those of Rebecca along the way.
Great. Okay, thanks, Joe. So we're going to go through the 5 practices. So we're going to get into the how now. And as I said in the beginning, these might seem really straightforward, but I find a lot of people don't always focus on them. And as I'm going through them, what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think in your mind and pick one leader that you'd like to influence better right now in your organisation. So have a quick think, and I want you to keep this person in mind as we work our way through, so you can apply the situation with this person to apply the practices to that person. Okay, so hopefully you've got someone in mind, and we'll work through. Okay. So again, this might seem really simple, but I find a lot of people these days, again, because of the pace of work, are not always very good at being in sponge mode, less good at listening to understand. A lot of people listen to respond. So they hear someone say something that's maybe a little bit provocative or that they disagree with, maybe it triggers one of their values, and they want to respond, and they spend a minute trying to work out what they're going to say, or kind of waiting for an air gap for them to be able to insert their view and maybe challenge, or maybe just provide a different set of opinions. And that's fine. Again, that's really, really normal. But I think what's important is to be able to listen. And I always used to say to some of my team in the past that if someone says something that's interesting that you perhaps disagree with, before you respond, to say that you disagree or to challenge, can literally say, that's really interesting, and ask 2 questions to better understand it. Because sometimes people just don't express things as well as what they would like to. And sometimes, usually, there's deeper meaning that sits below why someone made a comment. So I think what's really important is to be able to listen and to play back what the person said, and to acknowledge that the leader that you're working with has their own perspective, and respect that they have a different lens that they see the world through. Because remember, we all don't see the world in the same way, because it's based on our own past experiences and our own values, and they're all different. So that's why we get such complexity in people. So when we're listening, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to look below the behaviour. So if we think about that iceberg theory model, we're trying to better understand people's values, their beliefs, and their thoughts that sit below. So when we look at this, we see behaviour, but people's intent is based on their values, beliefs, and thoughts. And I said we want to understand that better, and the way we can do that is we can listen. We can listen more and ask questions to understand. Okay, so that's practice one. So just think about the leader that you're finding challenging. How can you listen more? How can you ask questions and really start to get to the bottom of a bit more about them? You can have a deeper conversation. Practice two is to be curious and to stop making judgments and assumptions about leaders. Now, we all do this, as I said. Some of our, cognitive processes really enable us to do that unless we become a lot more conscious and reflective in how we approach. So part of this is mentioning, as I mentioned before, that everyone has their own lens, and it's really important to respect where people are coming from, and you need that respect to build trust. To try not to make judgments and assumptions about people and to get more intel. And I find there's a lot of patterns in people. So what I'd like you to think about is think about the leaders that you get frustrated at. And we all do. There are certain patterns of behaviour that can frustrate me at times in the past. And so you need to look for patterns. What are the patterns in some of your leaders' behaviour that make it hard for you to be able to relate to them? And I think it's important to note that we can make assumptions about people's behaviour on a daily basis. And it's important to think about what assumptions we're making and how they might be getting in the way. Because when we make assumptions about people and if we get frustrated, that creates friction in the relationship. And leaders notice that. They might notice that you challenge them a lot, that you have quite differing views. And again, there's nothing wrong with having different views, but it's how you approach that. And even someone who has quite low EQ, they can work out that if there's friction. They might not be able to tell you why. They might not be able to pinpoint and say, well, I don't get on with this person because of this, but they can sense that friction. And if you have any sort of friction in a relationship, people are less likely to trust you, and that means they're harder to influence as well. So these people become risk areas. So what I want you to think about is, are there certain patterns in this leader, certain behavioural points, certain things that they say that perhaps you disagree with, and is that getting in the way of you being able to relate to them a little bit better? And in fact, I have an example that I wanted to share before I move on to practice three. So I had a business partner in one of my teams a few years ago, and she looked after 3 executives. 2 she got on with exceptionally well, and 1 she didn't. And she was always quite frustrated at him, and which is fine. It's okay to have a vent, have a vent to your boss. But she, we were talking, and there were certain patterns in his behaviour that really irritated her. So she found him very objective, very rational, quite cold, a bit hard. And as we spoke through, the leaders that she liked were a lot like her, and the leaders that she didn't get on with as well were quite different and were like him. So him and her were quite opposite in their approach to the way they saw the world, and it seemed to grate on her. And so I think becoming aware of these points and how you interpret other people's behaviour becomes really important. So again, think about your leader and what they might do that might kind of grate on you at times. And remember that behaviour and intention is different, but we often seem to think that they're the same thing. And they don't always match up for people. Okay. So practice 3 is, so we've been listening more, we've been asking more questions, we're trying to stop making assumptions and judgments about people. And so we need to, once we spend some time doing that, we need to translate that into some learning. So you need to be able to, articulate and say, well, what are the 3 things that are really important to this leader? So we talked about that they're a unique person, they're not you. And the way that you need to do this is you need to use your people radar. So turn up your antenna, really be able to notice words, behaviour, body language that they give. Everyone gives cues all day, all through the day. that tells us non-verbally, you know, what they're thinking and feeling. And so it's really important for us to understand people better, to pay attention to that. And I'm sure that you do already. When we're tired and stressed, we are less likely to be able to do that. So I think it's important to investigate what they really value, what frustrates them, find their hook. What do they want to achieve? What's really important to them? Who do they go for advice? Build a relationship with that person if that's someone that they really value. It's important to be able to ask some open-ended questions. So can you tell me more about why that's important? You know, I'm really interested to understand that in more detail. You know, how would you like me to support you to make X happen? So asking some open-ended questions to help you kind of fine-tune some of the themes that you're noticing about this leader, of what's really important to them. If I think about an example of an executive I worked with a few years ago, so we were going through a REM review process and he was over his budget. So he was over in his bonuses, but under in his salaries. So remuneration review process we were going through, and the BP just couldn't shift his view. He was not going to shift. So I sat down with this exec and asked him a lot of questions about what was important to him. What was he worried about? What was he trying to achieve? And we kind of got after asking about 6 or 7 questions, sometimes you have to be a bit patient, I understood that he had a lot of guilt from last year's process, and he was feeling like he had, for the whole year, since the previous year, had felt guilty about not giving a certain woman more of a bonus, and so he really wanted to make it up to her. And so, you know, once I kind of got to really understand what was important to him, what he wanted to achieve from this process, and why a certain person was more important potentially than someone else, then we were able to work together to help get his needs met, but also get him to come under budget as well. I've also shared with him that the CE's view was that he didn't have much tolerance for people being over budget, and this was a new exec, so he didn't know the CE as well. And so I had gone to him to say, well, look, between you and I, you know, so-and-so CE doesn't like when execs are over, but I didn't want to go and tell him that, so I wanted to speak to you first, and let's work together. Tell me what's important to you, and we'll get to an end goal where you come within budget and you can still meet your needs. So again, by asking questions and not making assumptions, I was able to work out what was important to him in that process, and then we were able to go through and help him achieve his needs, and I got to achieve what I wanted to as well, which was that everyone, all the REM review came under budget, which is always a challenge, as I'm sure you're all aware of. Okay, so we're on to practice 4 now. Now this is really interesting, this one. So we've got a lady, I don't know if you've heard of her, she's Canadian, Teresa Grosboy, and she has written some great books around influencing, if you wanted to read up on her. But one of her key points is to say, if you want to get influence, you have to give influence. So she says that you can't be influential alone, and you can't talk yourself up to be influential, and that actually positive words or actions from others are a lot more powerful. So she really encourages you to support leaders or others in areas that are important to them. So generally, people will view you in a more favourable way in the future if you're able to help them implement something that they really value, that they're having problems with, and they're more likely to help you be influential in the future as well. But there's a catch, and the catch is that it's really important that you give to help, not just to get back. So giving without expectations. So I spoke about sowing seeds. You just sow the seeds of influencing and you don't quite know where they're going to grow. Sometimes I've found that I can support a senior leader to implement something that's really important to her, and then actually someone else has seen me do that, and then they've helped me be influential in a way that I needed. So it might not even be the person that you're supporting, but people see that you're helping someone else be influential, and they want to be able to help give that back to you. So if I think of an example, in an organisation that I've worked in, there was a senior leader that we had a bit of conflict with around involvement with the union. So, you know, he had a tendency to support perhaps a more traditional view of employees and the workforce, and supported some of the union mentalities. And I didn't. I had a more progressive view. so we had a little bit of a, we had some, interesting conversations at times. And I knew what was important to him, though, was re-implementing a graduate program. So the organisation hadn't had one for a few years, but he was really influential. And so I decided I was going to help him implement that. Now, he was really surprised because we had quite different views on some employee matters. He was very surprised, but he kind of was a bit skeptical at first, but then we worked together to help get that across the line. And it was really interesting because my team were saying to me, Rebecca, no, don't help him. He's difficult. You know, why would you want to help someone who's making our lives a bit more difficult? And for me, that was a reason to actually help him, is that I knew that if I could help him be influential, that might come back to us and assist us. And it did. You know, I built a really good relationship with him where we found something in common that we're both passionate about. And we were able to build a better relationship, and he was able to be a lot more reasonable around his approach in the future. So, you know, that did end up coming back to assist me, but other people noticed that too. And I think it ends up saying then a lot about your character as a professional, that you're willing to support other people, do what's important to them, and that you're not being self-focused. So I think I find, because of the pace of work, that people can often think about meeting their own needs first, and some people are less likely to help others. So I think being able to give but not to give back can really help you be influential as well. Okay, so what we've talked about now is we have said we need to listen more. We need to just be conscious of some of the assumptions that we might be making about other people. We need to look for patterns, and then we put that, we kind of collate that intel that we get around what's really important to this leader. And then with the leader that you're thinking about, then we help them drive something, help them implement something that's really important to them that you agree with. I don't want you to pick something that goes against your values, but pick something that you want, that you can support them to help them be influential. And then the last practice then is around using that intel thoughtfully in matters at the moment. So what you want to be able to do is to relay the information that you've gathered around the leader and demonstrate that you understand what's important to them and empathise. You might want to hold the mirror up to positively challenge at the current state, and to be able to say respectfully that what they're doing doesn't meet their needs. But you're demonstrating that you can see you know what's important to them, and you know what they want to achieve. And so you can't do that without having done the other steps. I had another BP in my team a few years ago who was really practicing the listening more, and she was trying really hard to relate better to this executive that she didn't get on with so well. And she was listening, she was being more compassionate, she was understanding what was important to him, she was seeing past some of the behaviour and seeing why. And she helped him be influential, you know, but then she'd sometimes still get frustrated and, you know, and say, and we all do, because we're all human, you know, you said this, but it's not working, or you think this is important to you, but you're doing this, which doesn't help you. So, you know, in the moments that matter, you need to think carefully about how you might raise what you've noticed, or how you might challenge them in a respectful way. And something practical, you know, like this, that, you know, I can see that these two things are really important to you, but I can see that it's not, you know, it's not meeting your needs. How can we work together to take a different approach that, you know, that can still meet your needs? And I have a few ideas. So, I mean, a little bit wordy, but just something around that where you're saying, I know what's important to you. How can we work together so we can better meet your needs? So I think being able to...
That looks like a familiar face. Wonderful.
Sorry, I'm on my laptop now, so we're not quite sure what happened.
As I said to you, we're a group of people that work as a community, and we roll with the punches. So thank you, Rebecca. No issue at all. I was just recapping actually some of your we'd obviously got to the 5 practices, except or the 4 practices, and we're just recapping that with the group. There's been some really lovely questions being posed in the Q&A box, and I actually put it out to the group. One of the questions was, obviously in a virtual world, it's a little bit more challenging to read body language, and sometimes, you know, situations can compound, talking over each other, etc. So certainly we reached out, and there were some really good examples that people were happy to share around really seeking to become a much deeper listener. But wondered whether you might have just a couple of quick any hints and tips that would help people with that kind of reading of the play when you're in a virtual world.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really good question, and I think some people become more reserved on, you know, when we're speaking to them virtually as well, and others are a little bit more open, ironically, as well. So I think being able to take the time to talk about non-work stuff as well, so helping, you know, getting to know people and the challenges they're experiencing through this, you know, unprecedented time, I think that really helps building rapport as well. And sometimes I find you just need to ask more questions. So I'm all about, you know, we have one mouth and 2 ears, and so that means, you know, we need to listen doubly as much as what we speak. So yes, it can be hard to build rapport, but we can ask questions to understand people better. So I kind of get more intense in question asking, so yep. I can, you know, really, you know, I'm demonstrating that I want to understand the leader's perspective, and, you know, trying to understand what's important to them so I can achieve what they want to, as well as what I want to as well.
100%. And Catherine very kindly shared agreeing some ground rules and etiquette up front around communication is a great one. Certainly around, you know, avoiding people talking all over each other. What we'll do is let's go back to the Q&A as planned a little bit later on, because I think we're just at a critical point. Thank you, everybody. We kept everybody on board. So thank you for sticking with us, and handing over to you, Rebecca. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Apologies, everyone. So the internet was working on my computer, but not Zoom. So it was all a bit bizarre, but I'm really glad that you stayed with us. Thank you. So we got to practice 5, which was using our intel thoughtfully in moments that matter, and language becomes really important. So we're going to pause now and have a think about those 5 practices. So which ones do you find harder to do every day? So Joe, I might just get you to put the poll up, and I'm really interested to know, yeah, what practice do you find hard, and then have a think about what's maybe getting in the way of that. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts.
I'll give that another 10 seconds or so before we end the polling. Another couple of seconds. Here we go. End the polling. And
okay, it's a bit spread, so it looks like people are listening, which is great. But the area that people are struggling with is, or find a bit harder to do, is identifying the 3 areas that are consistently important to people. Okay. So do people want to share a little bit more about what they find hard about it? We can use the chat box to be able to share some of those.
Perfect. I'll monitor the chat box, and if anyone's got anything that they wanted to share around those areas, please feel free to add that content.
And whilst we're waiting for that, I might just add that, so to be able to identify those 3 areas that are consistently important, it's asking some quite targeted questions. So I know I can send you some of the questions that I had put up earlier when after the webinar, but some of those questions are around, you know, tell me what's really important to you, tell me why it's important to you, you know, tell me what I can do to help support you. So I guess being really asking, it's good to be listening and stop making judgments, but asking some quite specific questions to work out what's important to people, I think is really important. And it might be around, so let's take the example of the remuneration review, and I said that executive that had gone over budget. It might be you sitting down at the beginning of doing an initiative like that and saying, okay, so what's really important for you? What do you want to achieve from this? And, you know, they might have a kind of a shallow blanket response, but it's being able to take the conversation down to a deeper, you know, it's ask some targeted questions to get some deeper responses from the person. I don't mean, you know, not too deep, but, you know, just to really help get that depth of response. And that might mean asking multiple questions, you know, in a slightly different way to work out what's important to someone around something particular. So good to do at the beginning of a new initiative, or even if you're working with a leader on something now that's not going so well, it's almost pressing pause and having a conversation around that kind of that recontracting around what's important to you, what do you want to achieve, and asking more and more to dig a little bit deeper. Jo, was there anything that came up for people?
Melissa just shared that for her, the challenge is just making it a habit and knowing what to ask, which I think obviously you've just responded to.
Yeah. And I think it's really easy for us, again, because we're really busy, to zoom through agendas. If we're meeting one-to-one with a leader, we usually have a range of topics we want to get through, and it's really easy to think that success means getting through all the topics. And I've tried to reframe my version of success with leaders when I'm having discussions, and my success is actually helping understand them a little bit better in that meeting, rather than being so task focused, which, you know, I've been absolutely guilty of doing a lot of the time. Okay, so I'll just go through briefly about the 3 biggest mistakes that I see people making when they're trying to influence. And I think these are relevant for a lot of enabling functions, you know, not just people in culture. I think I see people in finance and technology make these mistakes. So I think to be influential, you need a base knowledge of commercial acumen. You know, you need to have relationships with the business. You can't have a lack of interest. So if you have a lack of interest or knowledge on the business, I don't think you will be likely to get as much respect or kind of credibility. So I think that's really important. I see a lot of people trying to influence through process and using the rules as a reason to why leaders should do something in particular. And I kind of coin it as a HR police. So we have a lot of HR police. I've led a few teams that have had some people that have that tendency to be very process focused and understand that following process is important. But we can't use that as a standalone reason why people why leaders need to do something. There needs to be a deeper understanding of why it's important. And also sometimes our processes can be convoluted or a bit bureaucratic. And so I think using minimal viable design principles to try and make our principles as simple, our processes as simple as possible is really important. And I've really encouraged my teams over the years to do that. So, well, if leaders are not complying, then what can we do to make their life easier for them? How can we streamline a process to make it easy for them? And the last one might seem really obvious to not do, but I have found, again, when people get a little bit frustrated, they might, share their view with leaders that they think what they're doing is wrong or they don't agree with them. And again, this causes friction with leaders. And when you have a bit of friction with a leader, they won't trust you fully. And like I said before, then becoming and being able to influence them in the future becomes really challenging. So again, and these become your risk areas. So the leaders that you have that friction with, you're just not able to, effectively influence. So yeah, and I'm sure most of you don't do these things, but we've all done them guiltily when we're a little bit frustrated or a bit tired. Okay, so to put all of these into practice, I'm challenging you for the month of August to do a 30-day influencing challenge. And I know Melissa was mentioning it's about getting into habits, and absolutely, this is all about habit building, muscle building, new neural pathways, whichever way you want to call it. It's all about getting into good practices. So I can send these out afterwards, and you can print them out and keep them by your computer desk if you like. But I think they say it takes 21 days to build a new habit. So being able to really focus on that in the next month will enable you to do that. So the first one is around being in sponge mode. So to stop talking and to ask questions, to listen, to understand. To look for patterns in the leaders that frustrate you and actually record some of your observations and know that these are some of your risk areas. focus on your senior leader that you've been considering, and again, spend some time finding out what's important to them. And it might be around a particular topic that's pertinent right now. So pick a topic and really, do a bit of a deep dive to try and understand more about what they want to achieve, what they want to avoid, so you can help them be successful. Help that leader that you were thinking about be influential. So think about what's important to them. They're having a lot of problems moving forward, and then how can you contribute to that and make them be able to be successful in achieving that. And then also start the conversation right. So really think about the wording. Acknowledge to the leader what they want to achieve, to show that you're listening, and then be clear you want to work together on that. So it's really framing your language in the right way that's showing them that you want to work together. Okay, so just for a bit of fun, Jo, we've got a poll here. So which statement is incorrect? So this is working through the themes, the 5 practices that I've mentioned. Which one's incorrect? Is it be open-minded and be like a sponge? Is it listen to reply, not to understand? Confirmation bias means we have a tendency to reconfirm our previously held beliefs on others, try to help others be influential, or to look for patterns in the way you react to people to identify your influencing risk areas.
Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds, but I think people might have been listening.
Great.
Here we go.
Oh, fantastic. Yep, that's right. Yep, it's number 2. So that was a twist on what I said. So it's listen to understand, not to reply. So, yep, great listening, guys. Okay.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And we have got a few questions. If you wouldn't mind, if I can put those to you. And I think these are seem to be so relevant, I guess, with the environment that we're operating in at the moment. Are there any suggested questions that you might have to assist in understanding what is important to leaders?
Yeah, so I mentioned some before. So it's being able to ask people, I'm really interested in understanding, I don't think they have to be really complex, but they can be, I'm really interested in understanding more about what you want to achieve on a certain topic. So you can ask, I think starting with open-ended questions is really important. And then from there, you kind of need to narrow your focus to understand a bit more about why. So I think open-ended questions is really important.
Perfect. And Sean asked, do you see influence in building a relationship with senior management changing not only during COVID, but as we move into that new working setting, with many people looking at not returning to the work office full time and teams working in different cities remotely? So the question again, was, do you see influencing and building a relationship with senior management changing not only due to COVID, but as we transition into the new world of work and working in a different way?
Yeah, I think it's becoming more important, and particularly when people are remotely working, you might have less of a tendency to have those ad hoc catch-ups like you do with the senior leaders that you're supporting. So I think being able to ensuring that you're having those regular conversations with them, because you're not seeing them in the office as much anymore. And so being able to ensure that though you kind of artificially create those moments to be having those conversations, I think they're even more important, because I'm seeing so many leaders and executives really stressed through this time. There's a lot of uncertainty, and I think the people on culture function, I think we provide such a valued support role to senior leaders, and a part of that is helping them achieve what they want to. And to be able to do that, we need to more deeply know what they want to achieve. And I just think at times we can make assumptions around what leaders want to achieve without taking the time, and maybe because they can't express it as well. But I do think we need to invest even more in these relationships right now.
I read an article this morning, and I love this phrase, and I'm going to hang on to it. The CFOs got us out of the GFC, but it's going to be the people and culture, the CPOs, that get us out of this current environment. So this influencing piece, from a purely P&C perspective at the moment, it's so critical. I'm obviously conscious of time. One further question, if I can, is I guess the challenge of how to become a better listener, an empathetic listener in this busy environment that we may not necessarily have the time. And there's lots of articles now about the shortening of meetings, conversations, etc. Are there any tips around that, seeking to become a better listener in this kind of really busy, noisy environment that we're operating in?
Yeah, and I think it's a really valid question, because things are moving very quickly. I do think sometimes to better listen, you don't have to spend 15, 20, half an hour, minutes listening and asking questions. Sometimes, even asking, 2 or 3 questions. So if you are really busy, just to better understand what the leader wants to achieve, what's important to them, and to make sure we're not making assumptions. Sometimes even 2 or 3 questions can really make the difference. So
Yeah.
I think it doesn't mean you have to invest hours, but even, I would always say to my team that if someone says something that's a bit outrageous or something that you disagree with, and usually you'd go to respond, I think it's okay saying, oh, that's really interesting, and can you tell me a bit more about, and asking those 2 follow-up questions just to listen to understand. I think keeping it simple is really important. So even if you just have in your mind, I'm going to ask 2 questions more than what I usually would, even that will, I think, help you get a better understanding over time of what's important to leaders.
That's great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Thank you so much for sharing. And there's been lots of notes in the chat box around the really practical, great tips that you shared with everybody. As we were getting the technology back, I said that you're very, very kindly going to share a condensed version of this slide deck with those 5 key areas for people to focus on. And then we're really keen that everybody engage in the 30-day challenge, and you're very, very happy to help engage in that, and happy to connect with people on LinkedIn or through your own email address to keep people on track or to answer any specific questions. If there's anything within this particular webinar that you'd love to learn more about, Rebecca is very, very happy to take any additional questions, and we're also very happy to host her again into a further webinar. So thank you very, very much, Rebecca, for your time. We really appreciate it. We appreciate you showing your adaptability, that we've jumped from one room to the other, 2 different pieces of technology. So, but hey, that's the world we're living in. So, but thank you very much, Rebecca. That's absolutely fantastic of you today.
No problems. Thank you again for the opportunity, Joe, and great to meet you all virtually out there. And hopefully you've taken a couple of tips that you can apply as soon as the meeting's finished. You can go into your next meeting, even if you just try listening and asking a few extra questions. I think that's a great start to getting on your way. But I encourage you to take up the August 30-day influencing challenge, and I'd love to hear how you go. So all the best. Thanks.
Wonderful, thank you. And for those still on, next Friday we've got a bit of a special actually. Some of you may have seen Graham Cowan, who's the one of the board members and co-creator of Are You OK Day. Graham will be rejoining the next group with a special presentation specifically around stress, managing and supporting someone and yourself who's struggling in this particular stressful environment that we're navigating currently. So there'll be lots of hints, tips, and Graham's very generous care in the message that he's providing next Friday. So we'd love to have you and see you next Friday. Thank you everybody for joining us once again. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week. Bye for now.